Welcome back to another episode of Please Call Me Crazy. Thank you for joining me. Hope you had a good holiday. Uh, we're back at it now, back in the groove. And we started out there with Vivaldi's Four Seasons Opus 8. That's Winter. That's a talented young violinist. And I thought that was interesting. And I wanted to share it with you because look at the skill that this young violinist was able to exhibit. And those of us that have been in that secret society, there's hard work and then there's talent. And this kid had talent, talent. But you know what was interesting? If you remember from the last podcast, we had a little vignette from the love of the game where the, the pitcher has to clear the mechanism. He has to get all the doubt and all the negatives out of his mechanism so that he can receive the energy to get the job done. He's given over to a process. If you notice that maybe you couldn't hear it, but I could hear it. When this thing started out, that young and very talented violinist, she was pretty tight. She didn't lose it. She wasn't even on the verge of losing it. But the difference between the beginning of that performance and the end of that performance was as she got into it, she cleared her mechanism on the fly. She grew into the moment. And that really is what secret societies are all about. In my most secretive societies that I was trained in, that would be called a get ready. She was getting ready there on the fly, and it really deteriorated from her performance. It detracted from her performance. It could have been better to my ear, but then I'm trained in this stuff. Maybe go back and listen to it, and you'll be able to hear that as it went on. She got more and more dialed in. She cleared her mechanism. We want to clear our mechanism anytime we need to, on the spot, in a split second, because we never know what we're going to confront. We may be called upon to do something of high skill. We may be called upon to be a medium or a conduit for energy to come through us, and we have to have our energy clear. We have to clear our mechanism. So I thought I played that really. It's a very subtle thing, but as they say, the devil's in the details. She was very tight at the beginning, and she cleared her mechanism on the fly. If I was teaching her, I'd say, let's try it again, but let's get dialed in from the very first note. Clear your mechanism before you start. Those voices in your head, those fears, learn to dial them out. Clear the mechanism. Focus on the task at hand. And who am I saying this to? Myself, of course. This is for me. And if you can benefit from it too, all the better. All the better. We're Truth Media. We're here to find the truth. We support the patriot economy, the businesses and the people that support the Truth Media. And we believe that Truth Media plus patriot economy is freedom for the American people, well-being for the American people. We're not kidding around here. This is a serious pursuit, not because we want it to be, but because our elites have let us down and they forced us into a populist uprising to protect our families, our faith, and our well-being. Hey, you know, it's just the way it is. It's just the way it is. Didn't even think about why. It's the way it is. Gonna have to get down. Or like Tony Blair said the last time, it is what it is. Okay? We're coming. It is what it is. Well, I want to thank Free People Radio for giving me this platform. Really appreciate it. Thank you, Free People Radio. TireGet.com, our sponsor, 14,000 different kinds of tires in stock, all your tire needs. On that unfortunate day when you need new tires and you have to take your time and trouble to go deal with it, remember, if you buy from TireGet.com, you're putting meaning into that transaction. You're supporting the movement. And we need your support, and we ask for your support. And thank you for supporting Free People Radio by buying your tires at TireGet.com. PrecinctStrategy.com, where you're going to go to learn everything you need to know about getting in the game of politics. And please get in the game, one way or the other. We're going to have to get in this game. We're being ruled by elites. that do not care about us. They're all about themselves. I've met them personally. They're not nice people. So we're going to have to deal with this as the American people in a populist way without the negatives of populism, which of course is anti Semitism, racism, xenophobia, the things that detract from we the people. We're going to leave those things on the side. We're not going to pursue that. We're going to pursue well being for all the people. All the people. I'm going to read a prayer because I think prayer is important. And I'm pushing this and I'm pushing it because I think we need it. And maybe it's something that you could adopt in how you think about things. Because when I pray, I believed I received it and I shall have it. Blessed are you, God and King of all worlds. Thank you for the ability to tell night from day. Blessed are you, God and King of all worlds. Thank you for making me in your image. Blessed are you, God and King of all worlds. Thank you for making me an American. Blessed are you, God and King of all worlds. Thank you for making me free. Blessed are you, God and King of all worlds. Thank you for giving sight to the blind. Blessed are you, God and King of all worlds. Thank you for clothing the naked. Blessed are you, God and King of all worlds. Thank you for releasing the bound. Blessed are you, God and King of all worlds. Thank you for raising up the downtrodden. Blessed are you, God and King of all worlds. Thank you for creating heaven and earth. Blessed are you, God and King of all worlds. Thank you for providing for all my needs. Blessed are you, God and King of all worlds. Thank you for directing my path. Blessed are you, God and King of all worlds. Thank you for strengthening America with courage. Blessed are you, God and King of all worlds. Thank you for crowning America with glory. Blessed are you, God and King of all worlds. Thank you for restoring strength to the weary. Power of prayer. As President Trump said about another subject, what do we got to lose? Try an experiment. Just try an experiment. Have faith, work on your faith, and believe you'll receive. Give up your resentment to other people, clear your mechanism. Clear the mechanism. Have faith, the faith of a mustard seed. Clear the mechanism and believe you'll receive. And let's believe we'll receive strength for the American people, courage for the American people, glory for the American people. I believe we're going to receive it. I believe we have received it. I believe we've received it. I believe it. I believe it was there on July 4th, 1776, just as it is here today. That's what we're working on, bringing forth those ideals that were codified in our founding documents. You know what's missing in this deal is we the people. That's why we talked about populism last time. In all the ways populism is tarred with a black brush. That's another little bit of racism ground into our language. Populism is painted in a very unseemly fashion because what it's going to do is it's going to lessen the power of the elites that have been robbing us, enslaving us, making us ill. We're about human well being. This movement is about human well being. Thank you for spreading this movement out. Thank you for sending this to all the people that you know and getting them involved in the movement. That's how we're going to win. That's how we're going to increase. What is winning? Increasing the well being of the people. Increasing the well being of the people. Let it be well with us. Well, sometimes things don't go so well. We know that. We see it here right now. You know, there's a group of people that are very important in this world. It's a big group of people. It's the Chinese people. And I've been, you know, promising some investigation and some sharing of what I think about this China situation for several podcasts. We just haven't been able to get to it. And I want to take the time to get to it today because nothing could be more important than we the people, our relationship with the Chinese people. And what the hell is going on here? Because Well, let me ask you a question. How many of you know? How many of you know Chinese people? Any of you got Chinese friends? I mean, let me know in the live chat. I mean, I'm talking about real friends. I'm not talking about seeing a Chinese. Like we started out, that young violinist, she was Asian, probably Chinese. In fact, she was Chinese. Okay. I mean, how beautiful is that? How beautiful was that music and that young girl with all that talent and all that practice she'd put into developing her talent, performing for us in a to Western audiences with a Western piece of music. I mean, that's kind of cross cultural, right? Vivaldi is not weaved into the bedrock of Chinese culture. Chinese people have sought out Western information as part of being citizens of the world. I have sought out Chinese information as being a citizen of the world. We talked several podcasts ago about Bruce Lee and many other of his contemporaries that came over here and taught the ancient Chinese secret to the Guaylo. They taught the ancient Chinese secret to the Guaylo, to the ghost people. That'd be me. Taught us, taught us the natural way and how that related to health and well-being and self-defense. And it was an incredible thing for me to learn, and it influences me every day of my life. Just like this young woman, this superstar, is influenced by Vivaldi. We're living in a world where information is it's a commodity that is fungible, goes all over the world. This information, isn't that the fun of being alive? Is acquiring new ideas and learning about the world we live in and learning about ourselves. That's how we learn about ourselves. Of course, our elites don't want us to do that. That's why they fill us with Instagram shorts and cartoons and crappy education, and drugs are legalized in more and more states, and people are disincentivized from becoming intelligent. They want us dumb because if we're smart and we figure out how we're getting screwed, we might take back some of the ill gotten gains these sons of bitches have acquired and accrued to themselves. In fact, one might say that the entire environmental movement is a cover up story for colonialism. I'm going to put a whole podcast into that. The environmentalism movement is a redirection away from the ill gotten gains of the crowd, that the entire postmodern social equity movement is a redirection of rage against the crown, against each other, white and black, white and whatever. These people are really smart. They're very smart, and they have control over academic institutions, which means they can brainwash us from the time we're in kindergarten. And we are brainwashed. We are really brainwashed. In fact, one might say that William Casey was correct. We will know our disinformation program is complete when everything the American people believe is a lie. He wrote it down. He was quoted as saying it. I mean, hey, you know what? We don't have to wonder. These people, these educated elites, we don't have to wonder what they think. They write it down. They tell us what they write books. They're interviewed. They're on tape. You know what you think? Hell, I mean, if you're on tape, great. I'm going on to the record now, but most of us don't write it down. They don't go on video. We don't know what you think. But I bet you probably think something along the lines of what you were taught by your parents and what you were taught in school. So the people who are teaching the children and what they teach the children is really determinative of what the future holds for us. And that's what we're doing here on the Professor Penn podcast. We're trying to broaden out the lens of description, search for additional layers of truth, not be caught up in a bullshit narrative that's intended to keep us trapped in the elite's business model of slavery, drugs, and piracy. Doesn't that sound awful that I live with you in a world that's controlled by slavery, drugs, and piracy? Doesn't that sound awful? It's a good t-shirt. Change the world. Let's throw this business model off. Well, the Chinese are interesting, right? Because they had a liberation day just like we did. Ours was July 4th, 1776. Their liberation day was in 1949. That's when Mao Zedong, who was the leader of the communists, officially defeated Chiang Kai shek, who was the leader of the Kuomintang, and the old ways of China were overthrown by the new way, which was the CCP, the Communist Party of China. How did that happen? And I'm going to tell you, it's really interesting because you can't get a more materialist group of people than the Chinese, right? So how was it that they went from having huge wealth inequalities and a stratified system with an emperor to having a broad-based, relatively much more broad-based distribution of gains and a communist party? Not to say that the Communist Party there is not really an empire or that it's not really a dynasty, because it is. We're living in the dynasty of Mao. And that's exactly what they're going to call it 500 years from now, if we're around 500 years from now. How did this happen? How was the traditional in China overthrown by the postmodern? Well, that's something we need to really think about because it'll really help us understand where we're at today. Tanner, can you play this piece, NBC News Taiwan on Edge, please?
Taiwan often compares itself to David facing down Goliath. The small island is just 100 miles off the Chinese mainland. China claims it's a breakaway province, and the CIA believes China wants to be ready to invade Taiwan within 4 years. Taiwan says Chinese fighter jets fly dangerously close to Taiwanese airspace, and its warships encircle the island almost every day. Tonight, Taiwan's foreign minister with a stark warning.
I think China might be repeating what we saw as the origin of the Second World War, and we have to be careful.
How much risk is there that one of these daily incursions could start a fire?
It is possible.
A real conflict?
Yes, it is possible. If you look at the history of war, there are plenty of war out of accidents, out of inadvertent accidents.
The U.S. supplies Taiwan with weapons. Still, the island's 210,000 troops are no match for China's 2 million. But Ukraine was outgunned by Russia, too. And Ukraine's resistance has inspired Taiwan.
We have seen the very brave Ukrainian soldiers defending their territory, defending their freedom and sovereignty. And that is something that we want to learn.
But the people in Taiwan are not mobilizing for war. This week were the annual dragon boat races, and the crowds were the biggest in years.
You cannot live in fear. You have to keep going with your life.
Emily Wu is a podcaster and says what makes Taiwan unique from communist China and a target is its democracy.
What's it like when China does these flyovers and sends its warships nearby?
It's intimidating because what if one day it's just not an exercise?
The foreign minister told me he does not believe the threat to Taiwan is imminent, but said it is, quote, apparent and increasing.
Well, there was a lot there to unpack as we get into the humiliation of the Chinese people. First of all, that's Taiwan. That's in the eyes of the Communist Party of China and virtually all the Chinese people on the mainland. That's a renegade province. It's like the Confederacy. They broke off. It's really part of China, and all the people that live there are Chinese. So, there's a good argument that could be made that it is part of China, and why is it its own, whatever it is, territory or country, is because it is a protectorate of the United States of America, that'd be we the people, no different than Ukraine is existing because of we the people. It's our military hardware, it's our training, and it's our deterrence that is keeping Ukraine in the game. And, I don't want to make a prediction, but I wonder how the Taiwanese are going to feel when this Ukraine scam comes to the end and Ukraine collapses. How are they going to feel about that? When you start having your leaders say, we're looking at the Ukrainians, boy, look how great they're doing, you're kind of making a you're kind of making, kind of building a house of cards there. I mean, if I was the head of, if I was in the leadership in the Taiwanese, I wouldn't be mentioning the Ukrainians. I'd be working on my own game. That's just me. Of course, he's speaking in English to an American audience, so he's trying to get we the people into this thing, because we're the ones writing the checks, and ultimately we're going to be the ones that die, both in the Ukraine and in Taiwan, if this completely spirals out of control. Which he went on to say, this is like the beginning of World War II, and wars can happen by accident. That's another lie. Wars don't happen by accident, okay? There can be an inadvertent or unintended military confrontation or an accident where some people die. If people don't want to go to war, they just quit right there. If they want to use it for an excuse to let slip the dogs, hey, the dogs of war get slipped. So, accidents don't cause wars. Accidents, and could even be a false flag, accidents are just the trigger that starts the conflict. I'll give you an example. When President Bush was first elected, this is before 9/11, there was an accident between a Chinese military plane and a U.S. spy plane. They collided, and the U.S. spy plane had to land on another island, Hainan Island, which is in the same area, and they had to land there. And they had that Hainan Island is Chinese territory, and everybody was all freaked out. Well, the Chinese weren't ready to go to war. They loaded the boys up in a plane and flew them home, and everything was good in the hood. So it doesn't have to. I mean, you can't get any more accidental than a mid-air collision. It didn't lead to war. It didn't lead to any problems. In fact, the Bush administration, they got along great with the Chinese. Great. Because George Bush is a globalist. That problem we have in the Republican Party, we got some nationalists. All of the Democrat Party is globalist. How do we know that? Because how Democrats go to office, how they run for office. They run on 3 ideas up and down the ticket: social equity, environmentalism, and democracy. Okay? That's their deal. Globalism, social equity, that goes all the way back to the Atlantic Charter, the self-determination of all people. Everybody's got to be equal. Self-determination. Environmentalism, a problem so big that no one country can fix it. Got to have global engagement on that. And then democracy, the end of history. Our values about human rights. In other words, the justification for empire. Kind of like the crown paying for Darwin, Spencer, and Galton in the 1880s. Same idea. And half of the Republican Party thinks this is great. They're all down with the environmental idea because they're all down with science. They'll use the social equity idea. Works just great for them. No problem. In fact, how they use it is they make people hate each other with the social equity idea. They use it a little bit differently than the Democrats do, but kind of the same, okay? It's a little different, but kind of the same. Democracy, that's military budget. They love that. Half the Republican Party and all the Democratic Party, they agree. The fight politically in this country is for the heart and soul of the Republican Party. You got the people, the populist movement, we the people, squared off with the elites that have so much resources. Not only can they screw up the Democrat Party, they screwed up the Republican Party too. Hey, that's power. That's money. That's money. And as you're going to hear as a Republican Party activist, if you're listening to me as a Republican Party activist, you're going to keep hearing this thing, we need better candidates, which is a slap in the face to all the candidates that are running as we the people. Because we the people, the people that believe in God, they believe in the Second Amendment, they believe in, national boundaries, sovereignty, things that are related to individual human well-being. They don't have good candidates. We don't like that. What they're saying is, and I mean the elites, when they say we need to have better candidates, they're not better candidates. They're financed candidates. Let's get this really correct. It's not about good or bad as a candidate. It's about who has the money behind them. Because the elites are coming now to jerk the thing back into the center of the road where the status quo lays so that the money keeps flowing. Because the progressives, man, they're making a lot of progress. Because there's a left-wing populism and there's a right-wing populism. They're really the same people with one small difference, but it's kind of a big difference, actually. The left wing populists don't believe in God, and the right wing populists believe in God. I guess that's a pretty big what side of the football are you on? But they're both populist movements, and it's pulling the country away from that reliance on the status quo, on the center. So they're just going to put a lot of money into putting candidates into power that make sure the business model of slavery, drugs, and piracy continues, because that's how they make their money. That's how they stay at the top of the heap. Up yours. You know what? I'd rather have a left-wing populist as an ally than a eugenicist, okay? As long as those left-wing populists aren't eugenicists. And that's the problem. When they don't believe in God, they're kind of in on that eugenicism. That's the problem with the left-wing populists. Let me give you one that was kind of like that. Oh, his name was Adolf Hitler. The National Socialist Party, the Nazis. They were socialists. They were left-wing populists. Left-wing. They're painted out in the press like they're like rightists. Aha! Bullshit. These people were socialists. They were lefties, like the Chinese Communist Party that we're going to talk about. If you don't believe in God, hey, anything goes. So, we really can't hang around with those left-wing populists because they're kind of stooges of the status quo. The only group in this country right now that has any interest in, any affection for, any loyalty to the United States of America as a nation of people who want to have well-being is the part of the Republican Party that's in what is disparagingly called the Trump movement or the MAGA movement, which is they've just put so much energy into making that a negative thing. The greatest threat to the country. Yeah, it is. Not to the peace of the country, not to the safety of the country, just to the business model of the country, because we're coming to change that business model. And they don't want that to happen because a couple thousand people get to sit at the top of the hill and money flows uphill and shit flows downhill, and they're terrified that that could change. And that's what a communist movement is. See, that's why the communists are interesting. That's why they're interesting. When they got into power, be it in Russia or Venezuela or Chile or China or Vietnam, they stripped the money away from these elites because they view their money as being illegitimately gained, because they view the business model as being fundamentally flawed, because it's against the well-being of the people. Now, we in the Republican movement put a great emphasis against communism, and I agree with it, because communism is godless. But I'm going to say again, if someone perpetrates a white-collar embezzlement or a fraud and is caught doing it, is indicted, and then properly convicted under our rule of law, they might have to pay reparations. They might have their ill-gotten gains clawed back and returned to their victims. Oh, that'd be called reparations. As an American citizen, I'd like some reparations. I'd like to see reparations go to all the people that were victims of slavery, drugs, and piracy. That'd be all of us. Birth, death, a series of diagnostic codes and revenue streams. Whoa, I actually get choked up saying it. I mean, it's hard for me to say it. That's the world I live in. Let me ask you a question. When you go for your well-being checkup every year, are you somewhat afraid they're going to find something? Do you live in fear of getting a disease? I mean, all the shit that's on television. You're supposed to take this test and do this and do that. You got to have this vaccine and that vaccine. You had chicken pox. Okay, now you could get shingles. Oh, it's horrifying. And you keep putting all this medicine in your body, and you're getting more and more unhealthy. And then one day, like a guy I recently saw, powerful guy, if he fell over, he couldn't get back up. Reach that point where you can no longer get up if you fall down. Like a little kid, they fall down, they get right up. When we get older, can't get up anymore. Are we afraid that that's going to happen to us? Is that the best we can do? It's not the best we can do because I'm 63 and I was told not to mention my age. But I'm going to tell you, physically, I'm as good as I was when I was 25 because I worked at it. I like working at it. I like moving my body. You know, one of the things that pisses me off, and I'm going to just say this, get it off my chest one time, it's personal comment. There's these phenomenal athletes. They're phenomenal, way more physical talent than I had. Like that young girl at the beginning, she has phenomenal musical talent on the natural. You know, maybe when she's 40, she won't even play the violin again. That's how I am. I had that ability to play like that when I was her age. I even pick my violin up now. What is that? That's called, it was not a lifetime commitment to the violin. That's what it's called. But when it comes to my well being, hey, how can I give up that commitment? I got to hold on to that commitment because I want things to be well with me. So when I see these athletes who are professional athletes and they're just gorgeous at 20, and then you see them, you know, in their mid 50s, and if they fell over, they can't get up again. Hey, come on. They kind of missed it. They kind of missed it. They were used as inventory. They were never really taught how to be well through their movement. Sidebar, please get up and take a walk today. That's what I'm going to do after I get done talking to you. It's about 90 degrees here in Minnesota today. I'm going to go walk 6 miles. I don't run anymore because at a certain point, you have to start to walk. It's easier on your joints, and your cells don't need to be burnt up like that. I don't have anything to prove anymore. I actually can let people run by me. 10 years ago, if somebody ran by me, I'd run them down and pass them because I was goofy. Isn't it great to get a little bit more mature? Because we get humiliated. You know, eventually, you try to catch somebody and you can't catch them. You go, oh, that's humiliating. Just humiliating. Can't keep up with you. And that's what happened to the Chinese. They had what was called the century of humiliation. And that century of humiliation is driving everything you're seeing right now today. The Industrial Revolution, of course, started in England and quickly spread in the West to what became the colonial powers. Because the power of industrialization, the techniques of industrialization, were so novel and so overwhelming in their application. The power was so great that relatively small numbers of people could subjugate large numbers of people. And these people, because they didn't believe in God, they didn't have any problem doing it. They thought it was their manifest destiny. These people were screwed up mentally. They missed that one, do unto others as I would have done unto myself. They missed it. Their theory of the case was, if I can get away with it and nobody can beat me down, it must be good. They were eugenicists. They believed in evolution. They did not believe in God. They had a new theory that justified their business model. Darwinism. It's just what it is. Got to figure it out. Got to root it out. Got to root it out in ourselves first. There is survival of the fittest, but let us treat others as we wish to be treated. That's the yin-yang that makes life worth living. That's not what happened to the Chinese, okay? The Chinese were sitting there in their traditional way of life in China, a great country, a huge population, living in harmony with nature. China was a feudal society. It was. They had an emperor. Come on. I mean, how feudal can you get when you have an emperor? And some emperors were more or less interested in the well-being of the people. And then that emperor would have a kid, and that kid would be a mass-murdering maniac, and that'd be the end of that dynasty. Because the people, the way their politics works over there is they have a first turning where the people are the primary interest of the leadership, and then as things go to the second turning, the third turning, they become progressively more narcissist, more self-serving. Shit runs downhill. The people go, wow, this is not about us. Screw this guy, and they kill him, and they put in a new, emperor. Long live the emperor. And this has been happening for thousands of years. That's how they run their business over there. And in the 1800s, even though there was an emperor and it was a feudal society, People lived in nature. They had a nature religion. There was well being. Even though people had nothing of material worth, they had something of spiritual worth. They were farmers. They lived close to the land. They had the freedom of creating their own food. They had family structure that was very well developed. They had a very well developed culture full of wisdom and knowledge. And then they ran into the gunboat and they were colonized. And they were colonized in very unpleasant ways. Unpleasant. Wars started to be fought over in China. For example, the first Opium War was fought from 1839 to 1842. Well, guess who was involved? China and England. What was it about? It was about the right of the English to addict the Chinese people to drugs, a drug called opium. Oh, slavery, drugs, piracy. There you have it. They had a second Opium War, 1856 to 1860. That resulted in piracy, baby. This is hilarious, right? The British beat them with technology quite easily, right? And then taxed them for having the impudence to fight back. And they actually forced the Chinese to cede what is now known as Hong Kong to the British Empire. They actually took their shit away from them. So they used drugs and piracy, okay? And there was slavery because they wanted to exploit the very low-cost labor that was inherent in China. And they had many Chinese Confederates that were in on it. They put lots of Chinese in on this payroll, right? So they had these two wars. We had these Opium Wars. It was a humiliation for the Chinese people, a proud culture with a long tradition, to lose these wars to a Western technology that was better at killing than the Chinese were, which was really upsetting for the Chinese because they had quite a martial culture. They just hadn't run into the gunboat before. Screwed them up. Well, they weren't done fighting, okay? The fighting continued because the British intervened into Asian politics and they started to back up the play of the Japanese. Because what was going on in Asia? The Chinese, the Japanese, the Koreans, the Thais, they were all looking out at the world and saying, hey, this technology thing, we don't have it. We better get in on it. We need to modernize. The great century of modernization, where the Asian cultures were trying to look at what was happening in the West and implement those technological systems in their home countries, both to defend themselves and to get the gains of technology. And of course, the British, hey, they saw these natural antagonisms that existed in the Middle East and Asia, and they started to play the Japanese against the Chinese, and those two groups had been fighting each other for centuries, but with swords and arrows. It was a conflict, but it wasn't a conflict that put the whole future of the world at risk. It was a very personal conflict. So the British started teaching the Japanese how to have a modern military, how to have modern industrial technique. And the Japanese, with the British help, they went way ahead. That's why our first wave of protectionism in this country was against the Japanese under President Reagan. That's why the Japanese attacked the United States in World War II, because they had jumped up and they said, hey, you take our Bushido culture, our martial culture, plus industrialization, we're going to kick these Westerners' asses. And they went off and they tried to do it. And in fact, the Japanese fought a war against the Chinese, started on July 25th, 1894, through the 17th April, 1895. That was the first Sino-Japanese War. And the war demonstrated the failure of the Chinese to keep up with the modernization like the Japanese had. And they just beat the hell out of them. And there's all these concessions and reparation and et cetera, and so on. Japan got territory and money and trade rights. I mean, China was called the weak man of Asia. They just couldn't get it together. Then they had the Boxer Rebellion. There's another one, the Boxer Rebellion. The Boxer Uprising, 1899 through 1901. That's when the Chinese martial artists came out of the Shaolin temples and came down into the cities and really started to have what just give these Guaylo, the Westerners, what for invading and having colonization in their country. Had a big war, big war. It was a big war. And of course, 8 Western countries teamed up, and the Boxers were defeated because, again, they were technologically unprepared to fight a modern military engagement. And there was 8 colonies were set up where the money was in China, and the West went about extracting wealth from China. And as I said, there was many Chinese Confederates, and it was just terrible. China was humiliated. I mean, really, truly humiliated. And the ultimate signs of these humiliation for China was Taiwan and Hong Kong. Taiwan and Hong Kong. Hong Kong was ceded to the British as part of the Opium Wars, and Taiwan became subject to Japanese colonial rule as a result of the 1895 treaty. That was that first Sino-Japanese war. And, the Japanese took over Taiwan, which, is right on the Chinese. I mean, it's right off of China. So these things are hugely humiliating. The Chinese lost war after war, and they had to make concession after concession. And it led to a reevaluation of, what was governance in China. It led to the end of the imperial system, or the system of empires, or of emperors. And it led to first a more Western kind of democracy, and then ultimately it led to this communist revolution, which was in 1949. And really what really put things in hyperdrive to end the old Chinese system was the Japanese invasion of China, which was on September 18th, 1931. Tanner, can you find the chart and put up the chart that has a fraction of the various countries' population who died in World War II? If you can you zoom in on that? Is it possible to zoom in on that top chart? Because this is really interesting. Because if you take a look at how many people died, the worst by percentage was Belarus, right? You take a look at but the numbers were smaller. When you get down to China, 20 million Chinese died in World War II, 20 million. It was 5% of their population died in that war. I mean, this is mass death, right? And the Japanese were just so horrible about the way they prosecuted the war in China. The war atrocities in China perpetrated by the Japanese were every bit as horrific as the Nazis in Europe. Gets a lot less play. So the colonization, the continuous losing of these wars with England, with the West, with Japan, it was such a humiliation. It led to the end of the imperial system. It led to the formation of the CCP, which is really a Western idea. Look what's going on there. These countries in Asia were taking on Western political and economic philosophies to keep up, to maintain their freedom. I mean, what the hell does communism have to do with China? So we just have to ask ourselves, what are these Chinese doing with these Western philosophies? What are the Japanese doing with these Western philosophies? What they're trying to do is protect themselves from the West. The West, that would be us, the British, the Crown, colonize these people. The Japanese, then the Chinese, it just create complete chaos like we see in the Middle East, because the natural order of things is disturbed by colonization. And the Chinese adopted these Western techniques of industrialization and political economy to get organized to defend themselves. Okay, great. That's what happened. Now, what does it really mean? Okay, what I'm trying to get at here is the experience of the Ukrainians and the Russians is very similar to the experience of the Japanese and the Chinese. The Russians. We're told the Russians are expansionist and that we have to fight against them when in fact we've been fighting wars inside of Russia since 1807. You know, that reminds me of Mr. History Doesn't Matter. Well, up yours, it does matter. Are the Russians really expansionist? I don't know what they're going to do. But if we keep attacking them, of course they're going to fight back. The point is to understand who caused the fight, and that's the British Crown. Who caused the problem matters. It matters to our foreign policy in the future when we create an essential American foreign policy, not a foreign policy of the Crown. I don't give a shit that the English were at war with the Russians. It doesn't have anything to do with me or my well-being. I live in Minnesota. I don't live on the border of Russia. I'm interested in the well-being of Minnesota, of my family, of my community. The same thing applies in China. I mean, my goodness gracious, these people were attacked over and over again and colonized, no different than the Russians, by the West. And we don't have any knowledge of that, and it's not taught in our schools. I mean, did you know that the United States of America colonized China? Did you know that? Did you know that the English armed the Japanese and taught them how to fight a modern war, and that the Japanese immediately went and attacked the Chinese with Western arms and Western techniques? How do you think the Chinese felt about that? For them, it was survival. They were attacked. They didn't attack. They were attacked, and they needed to survive, so they took on Western techniques, industrial techniques, and then political techniques. Marxism. They imported the Marxist philosophy of the European intellectual tradition, no different than we did here in America. This thing is spread out around the world like an anti-gospel, which is exactly what it is. You know, got that thing, spread the gospel around the world? Well, this is the anti-gospel. And it's uptaken most dramatically and most efficiently by those cultures which don't have any relationship to the Judeo-Christian roots of Western civilization, which is actually typified by the Chinese. So here we go. Here we have genocide. We have the ceding of territories. We have economic exploitation. We have genocide. We have it on an industrial level. We have it over hundreds of years. And then the war ends in 1945. And the Chinese fight a little bit longer. And the CCP, which is a populist uprising, that's populism right there. You want to talk about populism? That was the formation of the CCP. They swept away all the old structures. They took it. This is where Mr. History Doesn't Matter won the day. Mr. History Doesn't Matter is a communist. He doesn't know it, or maybe he knows it, and he's just trying to make the rest of us communists. I don't know. Don't know. It can't get in his head. But he can come on and talk to me about it. I'd like to know if he's really a communist. I suspect he might be. But you know what? That's just me making up a story. And we don't like to do that here in the Professor Penn podcast. We want to get the facts. So Mr. History Doesn't Matter, come on in and tell us. Because I'll tell you what they did in China when the communist Chinese took over in 1949. The first thing that happened was all the old guard, they boogied to Taiwan, where they were protected by the United States of America. Or they boogied to Hong Kong, where they were protected by the British. Wow, what a surprise. The people of China threw off their overlords who had used this Western model of slavery, drugs, and piracy. They threw them off. Of course, the emperors had something to do with slavery, drugs, and piracy too. But they threw out the outsider. You know what we can tolerate from our family, we won't necessarily tolerate from our neighbor. They threw these bums out of there. Okay, they made their own country, and the British maintained Hong Kong and the United States, and the British maintained Taiwan, and the Japanese had been defeated. And what did the United States of America do? We took over the Japanese political, foreign policy concerns in Asia, and the English were spent. We took over the British foreign policy concerns in the rest of the world, and we became the empire. Oh, weren't we smart? Weren't we smart? That would be called young and dumb and full of you-know-what. stupid. We didn't make an essential American policy. We didn't have our own internal policy and our own foreign policy. We said, oh, slavery, drugs, and piracy. Remember I said in a previous podcast on July 4th that our elites on July 4th, 1776, they were more like the people than they were like the crown. But as soon as they used the people to get rid of the crown, they set up the same business model, slavery, drugs, and piracy. So now we got a populist movement in this country, in the United States of America, in 2023 that is again trying to throw off this terrible business model. And of course, I'm an anti-Semite because I'm saying things that the elites don't like. So go ahead. Call me anti-Semite all you want. You know how stupid you sound? You're stupid to call me an anti-Semite. I'm Jewish. Call Royce a racist, a white supremacist. Go ahead. 265-pound black man. Go ahead. Do that. Do that. Go ahead. Let's see how long this kind of bullshit lasts. Anyhow, I digress. The Chinese are different in their cultural substrate than we are here in the West. I've been there many times. I love a lot of things about China. A lot of things. And I'm going to say to all my Chinese viewers and listeners, I think nothing could help China more than the idea of redemption and forgiveness. That's why President Xi is so discriminatory against Christians. They don't want Christianity in China. They've wiped away all the past, all the Qigong, all the temples, all the history, all the belief in gods. Everything the Chinese had as their cultural heritage was wiped away in 49 so that they could create a workers' paradise. And they did it. They successfully made the people stupid. But the Chinese are so hardworking and they study so hard. You know what? Information's everywhere. It's a fungible resource. So, the Chinese people, they're smart. They study hard. But they're missing one critical element in their race to increase their wealth and their well-being. They're missing the idea of forgiveness. They just don't have the idea of forgiveness. I'm not saying individual Chinese don't forgive, but it's always relative. You're good or bad by comparison. Because we got a lot of people in the United States that won't forgive, live their lives out of vengeance. We know who some of these people are. Like John McCain when he voted against President Trump when there was a chance to get rid of this anti-well-being Obamacare, this bullshit story where we have health care for all in a for-profit system. What a joke. You want to talk about elites manipulating the system? There's 10 podcasts right there. But he had revenge on his mind against Trump. Or maybe he was always a lefty. I don't know, and I can't ask him because right after he had that vote, he died. He took the truth with him to the grave. And boy, is Arizona a mess. But the Chinese just don't have, in my experience, the same level of willingness to forgive that Christian cultures do. They're very Jewish. They even say an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth, and they know exactly what they're talking about. As a matter of fact, they don't trust Jewish people, but they respect them. I know because I've been there a lot. They'll even look at you and say, I respect you because you're Jewish. In other words, because you're smart and you're tough to bullshit. They didn't know that I had been baptized in 1988, and I was stupid too. And when they figured that out, well, they took advantage of me too. Because I'm very trusting. I trust people, and I forgive them. And I forgive my Chinese brothers for everything that happened. Because I want peace with them. Because I know them very well. I know them very well, and I know that they don't have an imperial goal. They just don't have it. I know we're told that constantly here in our media, because our media is controlled by the state, and the state, remember that status quo, $1.5 trillion every year for the military-industrial complex, and $1.5 trillion every year for the medical-industrial complex, and everybody agrees about that shit? That's why the state keeps telling us that Putin and Xi are dictators that want to control the world. Well, do they? Compared to what? Compared to democracy? where we have 350 golf courses all over the world, and we have our military all over the world, and we're fighting wars continuously since 2000 and Bush? Excuse me. I'm getting a little worked up, and I don't have a good sense of humor about this. Chinese people are very much like the American people. They want to be left alone, to live their lives, to enjoy their families, to become economically secure, and to do whatever the hell they want to do. That's who they really are. I know many individual Chinese, hundreds of them. There's a saying in China, whatever the government policy is, there's a solution. These people don't even want to follow rule of law. These people are rugged individualists. They don't trust the government. They got to deal with the government. Here's their deal. As long as you all leave us alone, we're good. Do whatever the hell you want to do. But don't tread on me. That's the deal in China. Huh? You bet you never heard that one before. Let me say it again. The deal between the Chinese people and the CCP is, as long as you let me do my own thing and I can make money, do whatever the hell you want to do. We don't care. That's how individual Chinese people think about it. And isn't that very similar to our country? Hey, we don't care. We don't want to be involved in politics. I just want to do my thing. Leave me alone. Very similar. But the Chinese have one feature that the government is able to use, and they use it to great, great effect, which is China is like an Old Testament country. They don't have the clear the mechanism thing. They just don't have it. Their thing is set up with face. Don't step on my blue. Do anything you want to do, but don't step on my blue suede shoes. That's who they are. Because once you step on the blue suede shoes, it's over. There's no, oh, I'm sorry I stepped on your blue suede shoes. They don't take that sorry. They'll stick that blue suede shoe right up your ass. And that's why we have this conflict with the Chinese right now. Because they are unforgiving. And think about what's going on. Just like the Russians, we're on their border in the Ukraine, arming a renegade province, which is the Ukraine. It's a renegade province. I'm talking about in the minds of the Russian. Let's get in the other street corner and see how those people are thinking about it. In their mind, we're arming a renegade province. Oh, kind of like, well, let's go look it up. Who supported the Confederacy during the Civil War? Okay, who was in on that? Because people jumped right in there, right? Well, that's another podcast. But we're doing it in the Ukraine. We're actually arming a renegade province that's pursuing a war against Mother Russia. And in Asia, we're arming a renegade province, Taiwan. So not only do they not forgive the British and the Japanese for what was done to China over a couple hundred years of colonial engagement where the Chinese were exploited through slavery, wage slavery, actual slavery, real slavery in China, real drugs, 2 wars over opium, and piracy. The British took Hong Kong. They took a whole part of the country away. Okay, you fought a war with us. We started it. You fought back. We beat you. And therefore, since we beat you, you got to pay us for fighting back, for us trying to exploit you. What a sick deal that is. I mean, really, you have to say, really? Do the British really deserve forgiveness for that? Well, that's where America came in with the Atlantic Charter. Roosevelt made the British give up their colonies, but not Hong Kong. They kept it until 2019. It was supposed to be kept for a lot longer. Hong Kong was supposed to have 1997, the British ceded Hong Kong back to China after a very long period of British rule. And I got to tell you, the Chinese don't like the Hong Kongese because they think they're British. There's a kind of a racism within the Chinese community. the Hong Kongese always thought they were superior to the Chinese. Oh, that's another little face deal where there's no forgiveness. So the Chinese, the CCP, took back political control of Hong Kong. There are those who have said that the whole COVID thing was intended to quell and put down the freedom movement in Hong Kong, which was fighting against CCP rule because everybody had to go home and put a mask on. That was the end of that shit. I don't know if it's true or false. I'm just saying it's a theory. Truth commissions, maybe one day we'll know. And here in Taiwan, we continue to arm these people and continue to set them up just like the Ukrainians. And we want to get along with the Chinese, right? And we're right in their backyard, sticking it right up their ass. So they came up with an idea. Can you put this up, this picture of this book, Unrestricted? You can go get this on Amazon or at your local bookstore, which I would suggest getting it at your local bookstore. Support small business because they're the people that are supporting the movement. But here's a book. It's a translation. 2 Air Force senior colonels on scenario for war and the operational art in an era of globalization. You got to read this, okay? Because everything that's happened to us the last 25 years is in this book. The Chinese military knew, this goes back into the 90s, that they just didn't have the juice to defeat the United States military. So they said, okay, everything the United States is doing is technology and science and scientific development of weapons. We can't keep up there. Hey, they still can't make a ballpoint pen in China. You know, we're talking about how great they are. They got a lot of gaps in their knowledge. So if you can't win conventionally through conventional military confrontation, what can you do? These two colonels thought up a strategy about how the Chinese can topple the United States. And we take it as they want to be the big dogs. And maybe they do. We don't know until we get there. But they for sure the hell want them out of Hong Kong. And they for sure the hell want them out of Taiwan. They want to end their humiliation, the century of humiliation. A group of people who cannot forgive as a culture, unforgiving. Look at our culture. We lost 500,000 people fighting the Germans and the Japanese in World War II, right? 500,000. They lost millions and millions and millions. We dropped 2 atomic bombs on the Japanese. And who are our biggest allies now? Allegedly, the Germans and the Japanese. Well, that's a scam. They're using us. But we get along with them. I mean, we don't hate the Germans or the Japanese as a culture. We forgave them. We forgave them. Okay? Not the Chinese. They're not forgiving anybody. And part of it might be as we continue to humiliate them by operating freedom of navigation exercises 50 miles off their coast, operating military bases that just all around them, having military alliances that is meant to limit them. I mean, really, we're not really recognizing as we the people our role in creating this conflict. In other words, we think it's our manifest destiny to fuck with the Chinese, and they're just supposed to like it. In other words, China, we're going to serve you shit on a cracker. We're going to tell you it's caviar, and we want you to salute the flag. Come on. We, the people, need to look at this and say, who does this benefit? Does it benefit you? Would a world war that starts in the Ukraine and spreads to the South China Sea, does that benefit you? Does it benefit me? Who benefits from this? Who gets the benefit? Who benefits from this? Not we, the people. We get screwed. It's my son that's going to go get killed fighting. It's my kids that are going to starve to death or get nuked. I mean, come on. We're right there on their border, just like in the Ukraine. I'm trying to draw out a picture here. Now, I'm not saying anything seditious. I'm not on China's side. I am not. And anybody that knows me knows that I've made decisions in my life that are disfavorable for me. I'm not on their payroll. At great self-sacrifice financially and at great benefit spiritually. I'm an independent person. Just like I don't work in a university. I didn't sell out. Could have sold out. Oh, if I sold out to the Chinese. you wouldn't be seeing me on this podcast, but I'd be kicking it in the south of France today enjoying my red wine because I'd be super wealthy. Because, they've figured out through unrestricted warfare how to pervert our system. And they did it primarily through trade and lawfare. But if you read the book, they talk about bioweapons and all kinds of other strategies that they've employed for the last 25 years to weaken the United States of America, like sending all their students into our universities. Our universities charge a Chinese student twice as much money as an American student. They don't get a discount, they get charged double. And the Chinese government pays for it because guess what? When my daughter graduated from the University of Chicago, I went to the graduation ceremony, and the physics graduates, there was 71. Every one of them was Chinese. There wasn't a single Guaylo in the whole group. It was 71 Chinese people were physics graduates at the University of Chicago, one of the best physics departments in the country. So they did it through education. They did it through media. They bought many of our Hollywood studios to promote their values. They did it through lawfare, and I'm talking about international lawfare, like taking over the WTO, the World Trade Organization, the World Health Organization, being potent at the United Nations, and trade, excuse me, by breaking every trade rule that's in the WTO contract. They just break the rules. They don't care what the rules are. It's about them. They are pursuing unrestricted warfare. In other words, what they're saying is, we don't need bullets and bombs to beat you. And how do we lose as American citizens? Well, we go down to the big box store and we buy their stuff in humongous quantities. That's that word, humongous. That word's got to go. We just buy on price. They have this tremendous advantage on price, and they use it, and we do it. We buy from it. We take that price. And they've accrued phenomenal financial strength on the backs of the American consumers who we've been taught since the 60s, low price guarantee, price, 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 price. Not value, price. And while they've hooked all of us on this price model, they've crapified our supply chain so things wear out really quick and don't work very well. Hey, you know what? The younger people don't even know it was ever different. The young people think this is what life is. And of course, they want to get rich doing it, but they're also destroying our whole country. If you start tracking back the money and who's on the payroll of the Chinese, it's our elites. Our elites are in cooperation with the Chinese. And we, the people, we're the ones losing our jobs and getting poisoned. Come on. We got to get hip to this, and there's a very simple thing that we can do. We don't need to hate the Chinese. We don't need to hate them at all. We need to understand that they're also part of the slavery, drugs, and piracy model because the Communist Party imported European ideologies of industrialization and communism into China. So the Chinese people really are our allies. They're our allies trying to throw off this horseshit business model. But they're subject to their own limitations. They don't forgive. They have that century of humiliation. And how can they forgive when we continue to humiliate them by having our military positioned right on their coast and telling them, shut up, you better like it? You want to talk about a mafia play? Reminds me of those movies where people get slapped around and then the guy that does the slapping says, I'll slap you anytime I want to, and you'll like it. Go watch The Maltese Falcon with Humphrey Bogart. Great scene with Peter Lorre. Slaps the shit out of him, and Peter Lorre says, that's the second time you've laid hands on me. And Humphrey Bogart says, I'll lay hands on you anytime I want to, and you'll like it. Hey, that's how we're treating the Chinese. But let's see now. They've had this unrestricted warfare for 25 years. Let's see where they're at with their military. This is going to scare you. Scares me. Can you play this piece? People's Liberation Army.
也不算快了，我们出去那么多天，来吃饭。
报指人员，方位182洞，距离300公里，发现一批空中目标，向我接近。命令舰载机、潜艇、陆战分队执行1号作战方案。
上级命令我艇辅助在海域执行战斗任务，
配合水面舰艇进行空中火力支援，
引导上级火力，集体打击，大家注意清楚。
报告厅长，目标不稳定，声呐正在加强搜索。
加强舰手残余搜索。
是加强舰手残余搜索。
报告厅长，方位170发现目标，可以稳定跟踪。
有，方位170为1号目标，攻方角度准备。
14号发射管预备好。
有。
动幺，我是蛟龙，目标已确认，完毕。
陆战分队上报目标，4洞洞幺。
对陆攻击，打击目标，4洞洞幺边。
收到木子，
报文发出。
1号发射管，1号发射管。
导弹对陆打击准备好，指示发射。
唐爷。
你好，山东舰，这里是100号舰载机，我已返航，准备着舰。
你好，护航编队，这里是吉布提保障基地，补给物资已备件，欢迎回家。
你好，和平方舟，这里是海上医院医疗队，世界等着我们再度伸出友谊之手。
你好，81192，这里是中属礁机场塔台，跑道已天空，请立即返航。
你好，406警，这里是新一代核潜艇，当年困扰你的问题已全部解决。
你好，白马庙，这里是055型南昌舰，曾经小艇打大舰的无奈，已成为了历史。 你好，南湖红船，这里是航母编队，这100年成就已如你所愿。
你好100年，这里是人民海军，正在走向深蓝。
Well, what I found so interesting about this is about the worldwide adoption of this business model of slavery, drugs, and piracy. Because if you look at that through my eyes, it could just as easily be the U.S. military. The technology looks the same, the organization looks the same. You know, it's the adoption worldwide of science, and the greatest flower of science is the ability to kill. And I'm very well aware that what I'm talking about in terms of human well-being, well, I'm just going to believe I receive it because it's going to require supernatural intervention for human beings to wake up to the fact that there's just a much better way for us to run the world. And this has gone on forever, but things have really been getting better if you take the long view. It ebbs and flows, it waxes and wanes, and we're in a period of darkness. But overall, the movement of humanity is in a positive direction. And I'm going to take great solace in that, knowing that as we work through this period of darkness, the period of light that will follow it will be brighter than the one that came before. And then we'll repeat it again, this cycle, this ongoing cycle of waxing and waning of light to dark. But my gosh, we've all adopted this unrestricted warfare worldwide, this unfettered reliance on science. Science without any spiritual input. The whole idea of treat others as we wish to be treated ourselves has been supplanted by survival of the fittest. And wouldn't this be the ultimate game for these elites to play? Because the same thing's going on in China. There's elites that have developed there that profit from this weapons industry. They just are in an earlier period of their evolution there, so the gains are more broad-based. But they have the same problem there with elites and distribution of resources and how this thing is working out. And so for them, a war, hey, they're elites, they're good with a war. Our elites are good with a war. You know why? Because they survive while we die. Because no matter how bad it gets, they got a place to go. And I bet your bomb shelter is not yet built. Mine isn't. I got no place to go. I die here if this thing goes down. So we, the American people, we the people, knowing that our well-being is not part of this equation, we really got to get into this political process and stop this. Look at how the Chinese have reacted to their century of humiliation. I'm not saying I'm pro-Chinese. I'm not saying I'm pro-Russian. I'm saying we the people, let's take some responsibility for what our elites have done to us. And what they've done to us is we got divorced from empire and then became an empire. How fucking stupid is that? We did it to ourselves. And how did we do it? We didn't stay engaged. We didn't make our elites stay true to the principle of certain unalienable rights granted to us by a creator. If they had any belief in a creator, they wouldn't act this way because they'd have humility. There would be limits to their ambition. They wouldn't take our entire society and turn it into a war machine, which is what's happening. It's certainly what's happening in China. So if we're going to overcome this, we're going to have to get involved personally, each and every one of us, and just model really good behavior. Just be good. Pray. Be good. Bring back to our culture the missing elements at the individual level. You do it. You spread it to your closest. They spread it. And we're going to wake up in a couple of years or in a couple of months or whenever it's willed, and we're going to have a much gentler culture, a culture that listens, a culture that wants to solve problems instead of perpetuating problems. Because the way this thing is set up with the century of humiliation and the continuing humiliation of our presence in China's backyard, this can't have a good end. It's just not going to have a good end. And we're allowing it to happen. Do you care that we have freedom of navigation between China and Taiwan? Does that really matter to you and me? Does it matter? Does it matter that China might have long-standing grievances with Korea and with Japan, and that we're standing in for that? We're preventing that from getting worked out? Does that help us? Does that help me, my family? These are questions. I'm asking these questions not because I have the answers. In the kind of politics we're doing, we're going to have to decide this ourselves. We're not going to leave it for our elites writing in the Journal of Foreign Affairs for the Council on Foreign Relations to tell us, we the people, how we're supposed to think about this. We need to think it through for ourselves and come up with policies that reflect what we feel. In other words, are you willing to die for the Taiwanese people? Are you willing to die for the Ukrainian people? I mean, die. I mean, are you willing to watch your children killed to defend Taiwan or to defend Ukraine? Is that really a strategic interest that you're willing to die for? So the first question is this a war that we want to get behind as the American people? Because war is here, okay? Do we want to get behind these wars? Do we want to support this with all of our money? And then, after we've made that decision, let's say we said, yeah, we want to do this. Are you willing to die? Are you willing to die over this? Are you willing to give up everything you've ever had and everything you'll ever have to fight these fights? Because if you say no, don't tell me you're pro-war. If you're not personally willing to give your life up, and I mean die, or blow a leg off, or lose your sight, or become a vegetable because you got a concussive head injury, if you're not willing to do that yourself, why are you sending my son to do it? I'm asking the question. Young Tanner here, he's in his early 20s. Perfect, my producer. Perfect draft age. I think you're 22, right? 23 years old. You know, Tanner, are you willing to die for this? I'm just curious. There's not a right or wrong answer. Are you willing to die for these wars? Tanner's not willing to die for these wars. He's got a young daughter. He doesn't want to die like this. They don't seem to him to be worthwhile. Maybe we should ask our young people. Hey, young people, how many of you want to die to support the empire? Hey, that's a good question, isn't it? And on that note, I want to thank you for joining me. I wish you well-being. I'm asking questions. I'm asking questions I think need to be asked. I think the American people need to decide these questions. How do we decide it? Get off the bench and get involved. I need you. I'm asking you, please, in everything you do, realize that you are participating at a critical moment in world history and human history, and that whatever you decide to do, be it nothing or something, is a vote, it's a choice. Make a decision and live with your decision. Even if your decision is to do nothing, you're making a decision. You're making your will impressed in this game. And how it comes out is going to be the sum total of all the wills in the equation. On that note, I wish you a wonderful night, and I look forward to seeing you soon again. Thank you very much.